Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I read a fascinating article in the Ottawa Citizen a few days ago about Canada's lack of preparedness for military action, written by quite a esteemed gentleman, Andrew Chester, who has joined us tonight. He's president at Juno Risk Solutions. He's been very involved in Canadian military and other activities over the course of his career. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. In the article, Mr. Chester, you talk about being was it NORAD during 9/11 and that you were very involved in what was going on in Canada's response and how impressed you were with the response then, but concerned, I guess, about the lack of our ability to respond effectively today. Anyway, thank you for joining us. Andrew Chester, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
So let's start with this article. It was really quite interesting. Tell me a little bit about the point that you were making. Your title was Ukraine War, Canada Must Equip Our Forces Properly. And your argument was, I guess, that we're not equipped properly today. Is that correct?
That was certainly an element of my argument. What I was really trying to get at is there's a need to look at how we're responding to the activity in Ukraine, and include within the overall strategy that the government is employing military tools as well. You know, the Germans last weekend announced that they were going to increase defense spending up to 2%. The Poles said they would increase up to 3%. I could have argued that Canada should do something similar and increase defense spending, but I think the stronger argument that I was making was let's send a message to the Russians that we're serious. And one of the key things that we could do is signal that we're going to buy F-35s. I'm under no illusions that they would arrive this summer, but the message it sends to the Russians is we stand with our allies. We're buying the kit that we need to integrate into an allied air force, and we stand by our defense commitments. I further went on to say we should look at what the Army needs as well, rather than just putting 3,500 troops on alert for possible deployment. We can also message to the Russians that we're preparing for them to actually engage in conflict in Europe. We stand by our allies. It's more than just sanctions.
You made this comment in the article that you thought that 150 Canadian soldiers were going to be collected from different bases across the country, that we didn't even have a unit that was ready to deploy. Is that actually accurate?
I can't believe that that's actually true, but that's what was said in the press conference. So a battery of artillery is about 150 soldiers, 4 to 6 guns. We've got artillery regiments across the country. So when the minister said that they're going to draw soldiers from across bases, I was stunned as to why that was the case.
Tell us, let's just take a step back for a second, a little bit about your experience on 9/11. You were at NORAD. No, you weren't at NORAD. You were at NATO headquarters in Norfolk, Virginia, and you were impressed with Canada's response. Tell us a little bit about that, just so we can compare.
You know, that was an exciting day. Let me tell you, I was an intelligence officer on the NATO staff at what was called SACLAT at the time, Supreme Allied Command Atlantic, and at the time there were 2 major NATO commands, one in Norfolk, Virginia, one in Mons in Germany, and it was amazing how quickly those events unfolded. So if you can imagine a sunny day on a Tuesday. While we were watching airplanes fly into buildings, about 100 yards from me, an admiral gave orders to sortie the fleet out of Norfolk Harbor with the orders to shoot down airplanes. Put your mind around that just for a second. The decision to actually empty the harbor cost about $18 million in gas, and he took that in his own accord. He then went and he shot
$18 million in gas alone.
In gas alone, and he took it under his own authority. Then he took destroyers and he ran them up to all the major cities along the East Coast to provide missile defense against incoming jetliners. Again, all on his own authority. The same time, off of Halifax, I think it was HMCS Halifax, was just another day at sea. Went to action stations, went to its war box with exactly the same role, which was to interdict airplanes. We just by luck had a frontline Navy that had through the 90s brought in a whole bunch of world-class warships, and were able to seamlessly start that. When we sent the task force to sea at the end of September, those ships, all they needed to do was fuel up and put groceries on board and then go. They were ready. 20 years on, we have the same ships. Our aircraft are the same ones, and our Army is even less well equipped to be able to operate in a high intensity theater. These are problems that can get solved if the government wants to align its strategic messaging about the crisis in Ukraine to include our commitments to the defense of our allies.
We're chatting tonight with Andrew Chester. He is the president at Juno Risk Solutions. He's a former military intelligence officer. He's made a lot of comments recently in an article that I read in the Ottawa Citizen in regards to Canada's lack of preparedness for any kind of military action. Obviously, something that we've got to be concerned about given what's going on in Ukraine and Russia today. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back more with Mr. Chester in just a minute. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Tonight, we're talking about Canada's military preparedness, or frankly, according to our guest, Andrew Chester, the president at Juno Risk Solutions, our lack of preparedness. Mr. Chester's got really quite a illustrious career and background. Let me tell you a little bit about it, if I could. For the last 11 years, he's been president of Juno Risk Solutions, which is a cybersecurity consulting firm. Before that, he was executive secretary of the Joint Operational Resilience Management, JORM. Before that, he was a program manager at TradeBytes Data Corp. Before that, vice president of iJet Intelligent Risk Systems. And before that, for 20 years, he was an intelligence officer with the Royal Canadian Navy. He's got a law degree at JD from the College of William and Mary Marshall Wythe Law School. He's got a master's in international affairs from the Norman Patterson School of International Affairs, and he's got a BA in strategic studies from RMC College, I presume in Kingston, Ontario. Quite the background, sir. Tell me, if you could, just before we get back into the topic, why did you choose to join the Navy?
That's a really good question. Dad was in the Air Force. My brother was an F-18 pilot. I just assumed everyone did. And
RMC, good experience.
RMC was a terrific experience. You took a kid who did not have much interest in studying, despite the long list of degrees you just wrote off. Wanted to join the Navy and put me in an environment which forced me to excel academically and to learn other things. Military college was a terrific experience for me, and a good way for any kid to advance out of small town Ontario.
And then 20 years in the Navy, and now almost 20 years in private sector. Give us a little bit of a comparison between 20 years in the Navy and 20 years in the private sector.
It's funny. I love the time that I spent as an intelligence officer in the Navy, but I was more entrepreneurial, and bureaucracy I found to be a challenge to live inside. I found myself after 20 years with what I described as no marketable skills, so I went and became a lawyer. And with not the real desire to practice law necessarily, but to change my way of thinking, learn some new tools. When I was in government, I don't think I ever used the word value once in the sentence. In private practice, that animates all decisions. So how do you describe an issue of concern to an organization, have them invest money in order to reduce risk? I find that to be an absolutely fascinating line of work, and I managed to build myself a team of people equally share that passion.
Okay, so let's take that idea of value and apply it to your recommendation on jets. I understand that fighter jets have been something that the Harper government debated, the Trudeau government's debated. It seems like it's something we've been debating for 20 years as to what to do with the jets. Remind us, it's CF-18s that we have currently, and you're recommending F-35s. Tell us about what we have as a fighter jet system today.
Sure. So we signed a deal to buy CF-18s in about 1982. We picked them up through the course of the 80s, and we're still flying them today. They're old aircraft. They need to get replaced. There was a variety of different options that were available to the government when we went to market. We've been a part of the F-35 program since the 90s, in so much as we had officers on exchange in the States working on them. We were investing money in them. That aircraft is fundamentally different than anything that we're flying right now. It's not only is it a fighter jet, but it also is part of a network of sensors that contributes to intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. So there's a lot of punch that comes out with that aircraft. But I think from the perspective of the issue right now in Ukraine, that's what our allies are flying. That's essentially going to become the aircraft of choice for not only the NATO alliance, but our allies in Asia as well. The other aircraft they're looking at is a Swedish aircraft, which doesn't have the same capabilities, may have better defense offsets in Canada. I'm not well familiar with that. But if the objective is to order our Air Force into harm's way, then it would be made by this government. And the argument I made is that government should equip them with the best aircraft to do that job and to most effectively deter the Russians. It's a relatively easy choice at this point.
I think, all of us know how much technology has improved, changed, accelerated in the last 40 years. You're saying we've got 40-year-old technology right now?
The airframes themselves are 40 years old. They've been updated. The software has been updated. Weapon systems have been updated, but they're 40-year-old aircraft.
And the recommendation that you're making is what is sort of the current state of the art in fighter jets?
It's the state of the art in fighter jets right now. It's a much more capable aircraft. The advantage that we have is it fits in the NORAD role well, because that's what the Americans are flying as well. It fits in the NATO role as well. Our allies are moving predominantly to that aircraft, so that's a good fit.
And you use the word value. What's the cost of these?
Stunningly expensive. So if you would have saw me a year ago, I would have been saying that we should be looking at other aircraft types, but not now. We're in a different strategic situation, and that's what I think the country itself has to be thinking about.
How expensive is stunningly expensive?
Oh, these numbers are flexible. You look at the total life cycle cost of the aircraft, but we're in the neighborhood, I think, of somewhere around $60 billion. That number is wrong, but it's close.
For one aircraft, or for
the fleet of aircraft?
And how many are in a fleet?
And the full life cycle cost. See, this is the challenge. If you actually look at the aircraft, I don't know what the number is. It's $200 or $500 million, depending on how you want to capture it. But when you look at what the program will cost, that program is the cost of buying them, maintaining them, building the infrastructure at bases for them, whole stacks of cases. So that that's how the number gets as high as you see. But even somewhere between $200 and $500 million in aircraft, that's pricey.
And how many are in a fleet?
Well, you want to look at a squadron. So a squadron is probably a dozen to 15 aircraft. So we would not be looking at very many squadrons to buy initially.
Kind of a shocking set of numbers, but I think you're right that we clearly have to upgrade from something that's 40 years old. Let me ask you a different question, though. We've been talking a lot in the last, it seems like a long time, but it's only been like 10 days, about donations of lethal weapons. What is our inventory of capacity for donation of lethal weapons? Do we have much?
That's a really excellent question. Had you spoken to me last weekend, that was right after Zelensky made his statement. I need ammunition, not a ride, which will go down in the annals of military history alongside statements like "damn the torpedoes." He said that on a Saturday. On Sunday, Minister Jolie, Minister Annan announced $25 million of non-lethal aid, and you would have found me on the couch grousing about that. Wednesday, they came up and announced the sending of rockets, hand grenades, and other things. And it was clear to me that the government was being pretty nimble over at Defense Headquarters. I'm certain they were opening the cupboards and saying, "What do we got that we don't need this winter that we can send?" And the cupboard's not that full. But we seem to be emptying out of whatever we can part with.
Well, if we, for probably valid reasons, not wanting to start World War III, need to keep our own military personnel out of direct combat with Russia, we've got to give the armaments to Ukraine, don't we? Or we're just going to let them walk through it like Hitler did Czechoslovakia.
Yeah, that's a complicated question. What we're seeing right now is in Ukraine is the makings of a prolonged battle. So the initial Russian plan seemed to have been to move forward, occupy cities, and have Ukraine collapse. That didn't occur. What we're seeing now is the Russians shifting to its roots of the Red Army, which is a very artillery-heavy type of combat. So laying siege to cities in the hopes of breaking the will of the Ukrainians. That may or may not occur. One would think it probably will not succeed in breaking the will of the Ukrainians. So we'll probably see a prolonged siege take place in Ukraine. That's going to have NATO countries continuing to supply arms through its 2,500-mile border around Ukraine, which is going to make us very close to the conflict with Russia. So much like the sanctions are having a significant pain on the Russian economy, the provision of provision of lethal aid weapons from NATO countries into Ukraine is likely going to stimulate a reaction from the Russians. That's my concern.
What do you think the reaction is?
I think the most likely reaction is going to be cyber attacks against critical infrastructure in NATO countries.
I understand that there's this group Anonymous that have been attacking from a cyber standpoint Russia. That maybe some military forces in NATO have been doing the same. And I spoke just Thursday night with some cybersecurity executives, Ukrainian Canadian cybersecurity executives that are very actively involved in similar kinds of activities. Is that going to have any countervailing impact?
By that, do you mean, do you think that's going to have an impact on Canada?
No, is that going to have an impact? Well, frankly, both are good, but is it going to have an impact on Russia? And then what's the impact on Canada?
Cyber attacks against Russia will likely result in a similar response by Russia against those countries that are aligned against it. No escalation there. If in fact the battle on the grounds of Ukraine continues to go poorly for the Russians, if the economic sanctions have continue to have an impact upon the ability of Putin to maintain a stable country, he may choose to escalate, and by escalation, he could actually engage in cyber attacks against critical infrastructure, which are not disruptive in nature. We're used to disruptive cyber attacks. We're used to cyber attacks that lead to data breaches. But we haven't seen in North America in any great extent has been destructive cyber attacks. That which is designed to destroy electricity grids or to destroy financial infrastructure. That's my concern if escalation takes place. And this is quite a different environment than we've ever faced before as a country.
Don't you think that Putin has to be very careful to not bring NATO into the war?
Some would argue that NATO's already in the war. So if we have Poland and other countries sending fighter jets over to the Ukrainian Air Force to engage in combat, these are NATO fighter jets with NATO weapons that are now being flown by Ukrainians against Russians. Some would argue we're already engaged. We're not fighting, but we're definitely supplying.
Okay, but go back to your history and World War II. The United States stayed out of direct combat for a long time by giving Russia and Britain lend-lease, and so lots of armaments, lots of training, but never actually manned until after Pearl Harbor.
That's not actually true. Back in 1941, in the Battle of the Atlantic, U.S. warships were actually escorting Allied convoys, and were engaged in combat against U-boats. This took place, over half a year before Pearl Harbor, and it was a secret operation. But it was designed to support an ally that was under threat. The analogy is not that far off of what we're looking at right now.
Really fascinating. We've had some pictures of tow trucks pulling Russian tanks and other things, and some people have commented that the Russian military armaments being used in Ukraine may not be well maintained. Do you have any sense of that?
It was funny. My last job at NATO was developing and running their open source intelligence program, and this was back 20-some years ago, when we used to have arguments as to whether or not you could create intelligence from open information. The ability to get a window into what's going on now is truly unprecedented. So I've been following this very, very closely, and you're able to see a plan fall apart before your very eyes. So what you're seeing is an army which expected to advance quickly unopposed, now clogging roads and unable to advance the way you would like. Lacks the logistics, lacks the effective maintenance. Those 6-8-wheel vehicles require tires to be deflated to operate on off-road terrain. The tires are failing because they haven't been well maintained. These are problems which can be overcome. I wouldn't suggest that the Russian army is doomed to fail because of this, but it is frankly shocking.
Shocking that they haven't been better maintained.
Shocking that this war was not better planned for and prepared for. So the plan seemed to have been to advance smartly on roads, capture Kyiv, and be done with it. When that didn't occur, there wasn't a branch plan or an alternate to quickly move to in order to achieve success. That's why my real fear now is, rather than advancing armor and defeating the Ukrainian army, the plan seems to be to move forward artillery and to engage cities. And things seem to be slowing down these last couple of days. That seems to be a logistics pause to me, rather than a decision not to continue the war.
Well, you go back to your World War II history, and you undoubtedly know it far better than I, but there were numerous times where the armies had to slow down or stop to allow the support services to catch up and the logistics to catch up.
Absolutely.
This is a political question rather than a military question, so you may not be able to or want to answer it, but Putin wanted Russia to sort of join up with Ukraine again in a renewed Soviet Union, and for the Ukrainians to become countrymen. How can you ever dream of having people you've attacked and murdered and blown to pieces want to believe that they could actually become countrymen again?
Go back 10 days ago, when we were still waiting to see whether or not Russia was going to invade. And his experience before that was annexation of Crimea, which was very swift. His experience was moving into the Donbass area, which, although there was a prolonged insurgency, was not a huge conflagration like he's facing right now. I think he's frankly stunned that the Ukrainians are putting up the fight that they're putting. So that raises the next question: what happens next? And the world of defense experts are all scratching their head trying to figure out, how does this play out? And any of the scenarios I'm playing with, none of them have a particularly happy ending.
I had someone on my show on Thursday that said, or Friday, that said that he's so isolated, Putin is so isolated that he believes his own propaganda. Do you think that's the problem?
Certainly, that's one of the problems. Anytime you have a leader that so dominates the room, it's difficult to get a competing view into him. Your previous guest is probably reading the same things I'm reading, but nobody has a particularly good window into what Putin is thinking, and that's part of the problem as you're trying to develop strategies to try and end the conflict. Senator
Leslie Graham in the United States said probably a pretty controversial comment, but that he thought, and I'm paraphrasing here, and probably not very accurately, but he said the only way that this ends positively is if someone in the Russian army takes things into their own hands. I'm presuming that meant sort of comparable to the German senior staff that tried to assassinate Hitler. Is there any chance of that?
I can't speak to that with any degree of clarity. But certainly the impact that this war is going to have on Russia proper is going to have quite a destabilizing impact upon the country. Either there's a crackdown into an even more despotic state, or there's a crack, and it's interesting. In this world of open information, there is the ability to influence the population in ways that really couldn't be done 20 some years ago. And all you have to do is look back at the amount of influence that the Russians aimed to have during the U.S. election 2016. And to understand that very same playbook can be used against Russia now by the West to stimulate dissent and unrest within Russia. So the idea of an individual Count Stauffenberg, possible. The idea of refusal of the Russian state to follow the leader, that seems to me to be more likely.
Well, we've had 1,500 people last weekend jailed supposedly for protesting in Russia.
Yeah, there's only so many people you can round up and put away in a jail. If it becomes a solid, complete refusal to advance, this could have an impact. There's I'll get the name wrong, but it's a committee of soldiers' mothers or something to that effect. This formed back in the 1980s in response to the Afghanistan war. It's quite a powerful political influence within Russia. I can expect that with the sheer number of casualties that the Russians are suffering right now, that there's going to be a backlash, particularly when many of the soldiers fighting in Ukraine were conscript soldiers that terms of service didn't allow service outside of Russia. The stories we're reading is that they were forced to sign contracts before they crossed into Ukraine, so they became contract soldiers. This clearly is not what they signed up for, and if it continues to go as badly as they're saying, civil unrest within Russia is a real possibility.
We're chatting tonight with Andrew Chester. He is the president at Juno Risk Solutions. He spent 20 years as an intelligence officer with the Royal Canadian Navy. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back more with Mr. Chester in just a minute. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Andrew Chester. He's the president at Juno Risk Solutions. He wrote an article just last week in the Ottawa Citizen about the Ukrainian war, and his argument was that Canada must equip our forces properly. And he's talked about a lot of the things that we have not been doing to properly equip our forces. Mr. Chester spent 20 years with the Royal Canadian Navy as an intelligence officer, and the last 20 years in private business in a lot of very similar businesses associated with risk and intelligence and cybersecurity and things like that. Mr. Chester, you were saying that you thought that there's some issues in critical infrastructure in Canada that we need to put our minds to right now. What do you mean by that?
You know, I think if you're going to look at the conflict in Ukraine, you can't just isolate it to that piece of geography. If you put your mind back to the Second World War, and I used to read about the RAF Bomber Command and the U.S. 8th Air Force, which would go over and bomb Germany, and it took me a long time to realize that they actually weren't bombing Germany. They're actually bombing aircraft production plants. They're bombing Heinkel and Messerschmitt and BMW. So they're bombing companies. And in response to that, the Germans organized searchlights and fighter planes and flak guns to defend that industrial production. We in North America didn't face that. There were precious few German saboteurs that were looking to disrupt our infrastructure, bring the war to North America. Fast forward to today, and the risk now is that through the ability to engage in destructive or disruptive cyber attacks, our adversaries now have the ability to make Canada part of the battlefield if they so choose. So there's considerable risk to Canadian critical infrastructure should the Russians choose to broaden the war beyond just the confines of Ukraine and include those countries which are supporting it.
So what do we need to do?
Well, prudently, the same things that we have been doing, but with a much greater focus. We do know that the government has collaborated with some elements of critical infrastructure to share intelligence about nation states that have been involved in targeting Canadian critical infrastructure. The electricity sector is well engaged in these issues. The financial sector is well engaged in this, telecommunications as well. What I've been advising my clients to do is think about losing power for an extended period of time. What's that going to do to your organization? If you lost the internet for an extended period of time, what's that going to do to your ability to continue to function? These are not theoretical questions as they were several years ago. These are front and center questions, because if in fact there's a desire from Russia to make the pain of this conflict felt by those countries that are supporting with arms and other support Ukrainians who are killing Russian soldiers, we could feel that pain here.
Well, I just heard someone on the radio this morning talking about this nuclear power plant in Ukraine that was attacked by the Russians, and it appears to be in Russian control right now, but that it supplies 40% of Ukraine electrical needs. And so very critically, they can turn the lights off. Absolutely.
And in fact, the Russians have used cyber attacks to turn their lights off in Ukraine before. They did that in 2014. So I'm not talking in the theoretical here. This is a key part of the Russian way of warfare. But let's put a Canadian lens on this again. Last Monday, we announced that Canada would no longer buy any more Russian oil. Period. Other countries are doing the same thing. So if the reduction in markets for Russian oil makes Canadian exports look all that more attractive, that could be viewed as a net gain by the opposing side. Disruptions against the oil patch in Alberta would strike me to be a logical step to try and reduce the supply even more and make Russian oil all that more interesting.
So you're saying that Canadian oil and gas companies have to be very careful about cyber attacks right now?
I think all Canadian critical infrastructure needs to be concerned about this.
Well, when we can see a couple of trucks can close down the Ambassador Bridge, so it's pretty easy to mess things up.
That actually is a very good analogy to use. It doesn't take much to mess things up, and if you lose a transformer in the power grid, then one element of the grid's going to go down until you replace that transformer. There's a couple in the supply chain that can be moved relatively quickly, but typically it takes about 3 months to generate a new transformer. If you lose 600 transformers, well, good luck trying to replace that anytime soon.
But you're not worried about actual bombing of critical infrastructure. You're worried about cyber attacks to critical infrastructure.
Absolutely. I'm not concerned about kinetic at all. I'm much more concerned about cyber. And we know that these industries have been mapped for military purposes over the last several decades. So this is a concern that I'm certain that the government is animated with. I know many of my clients are focused in on this as a matter of some priority, and understanding how this could manifest itself and ensuring that the right controls are in place against that nature of threats, critically important these days.
Well, I guess a logical question then has to be Huawei. So I've had some people on my show that suggest that if we allow Ukraine to fall, that's effectively giving an open invitation to China to take over Taiwan, and that the most important thing we can do from restricting Chinese knowledge about what's going on in Canada is restrict, if not ban, Huawei from providing 5G. How do you feel about that issue?
It's that's a really challenging question, because there's the Chinese are leaders in 5G, so there's not a lot of other options that are available to that. Of our Five Eyes allies, we seem to be standing outside of the group with regards to decision on Huawei, but it is a question which we need to be asking ourselves in a almost a geostrategic sense. My concern in Europe is that the Russians, upon concluding with Ukraine this year, may move forward to do what Putin really wants, which is to destroy the NATO alliance. So picking off a NATO country and which doesn't lead to an Article 5 response would essentially collapse the alliance structure in Europe, but equally would collapse the overall alliance structure around the world. Your question is about Chinese technology. I think it's a broader question of an entirely disrupted international environment.
So my uncle was a U.S. naval intelligence officer during the Korean War, and he firmly believed in this domino theory that if you allowed Vietnam or South Korea to go, that it would start the march of communism around the world. Are you suggesting that we just cannot let Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, Poland be attacked by Russia, or NATO's done?
We absolutely cannot allow a NATO country to be attacked that doesn't have a response. So that's where I see the government in a position to strategically message that that's important. So beyond F-35s, we should be preparing to put a brigade back into Europe, into one of the Baltic countries to augment the battle group that we already command, to message very clearly that we are part of the alliance and that we are going to stand by our commitments. The this is a really critical moment, and I'm not advocating that what we're facing is a broader war. I think the steps that we take now could go a long way towards containing what could otherwise be a very serious escalation in conflict.
So you're a student of military history. Is this Czechoslovakia, Austria, or is this the attack on Poland on September 1st, 1939?
That's a really good question. People have been trying to pull out their analogies. Probably one of the most interesting things I read this week was an interview with a lady named Fiona Hill. You may remember she testified against Trump during one of his impeachment hearings, but she's a leading Russian expert. Wrote apparently one of the best biographies on Putin. And about 2/3 of the way through the interview, and this is the point that has been picked up by many commentators, she was asked the question, do you think that this could lead to the Third World War? And her response was, we've been in the Third World War for some time. People just haven't recognized it. And she walked her way back down to 2014, Crimea and Donbass. So what's the analogy? Are we at a point where Poland is attacked and we must respond by declaring war? Probably not. Are we at a point where we have to stand firm and make it clear that you can't succeed, and to allow you to succeed puts at jeopardy all that we stand for? Absolutely.
Should we institute a no-fly zone above Ukraine?
No. That's a good, complicated question. Short answer, let me explain. The Russians have not committed their Air Force, and nobody can quite understand why. You can pull up your Twitter feed each morning and watch colorful videos of Russian helicopters being shot down by Stinger missiles. The bigger issue is artillery tubes, and the Russians are very heavy in artillery, and that's what they're going to use to lay siege to cities. So you can install all the no-fly zone you want, and that really is effectively putting NATO countries at war with Russia. It's not going to change the fact that the artillery is going to be able to lay siege to the cities and force the capitulation of the Ukrainians in the Russian mind. So unless you're also going to put steps in place to destroy that, you're not going to have the impact that you want.
Couldn't NATO, in one swift action with bombers and fighter jets, destroy all these artillery units and convoys that are headed toward Kiev?
Not a one swift action. That would take days and weeks of prolonged strikes. But then you're at war, and then you're fully committed against an army that has got direct lines of communications to its overall industrial capacity inside Russia. That's a huge step. 200,000
troops supposedly at the Russian border and in Ukraine right now. Does NATO have anywhere close to that?
It's funny. I've been chatting with my friends, all with gray hair, of the days that we thought seriously about this back in the 80s and the 90s, and we have in the West have effectively disarmed our conventional capabilities. Russians actually have got a much smaller army as well. So back in the 80s, the thought in NATO was, we don't have conventional superiority, so we'll use nuclear weapons in order to counter the much larger numbers in Russia. The Russians don't actually have enough soldiers to occupy Ukraine, a country of 44 million people in a massive landmass. So we're both in the same situation, that we lack the sufficient conventional capabilities to engage in large scale conventional war. That raises the issue of nuclear threshold. The Russian military doctrine allows for the use of tactical nuclear weapons. in a much more permissive fashion than our view in North America. So it's a very frightful time.
Supposedly, Putin put the nuclear forces on standby or heightened alert or something like that last weekend. Do you think there's actually a risk?
I think there's absolutely a risk. You ask people, what does that mean? And nobody, frankly, really knows what it means. There's not a lot known about the command and control of Russian nuclear forces. When I was studying at the Royal Military College, I could describe chapter and verse the command authorities for Western nuclear forces. We just don't know how it works in Russia. So if that alert, which I listened to with some degree of alarm last weekend, if that means that they're just putting more staff at the readiness, that's one thing. If that means that they're putting their submarines to sea in greater numbers for increased survivability, that's something else. But again, no one really quite knows.
When former President Trump was in charge in the United States, I think some of us hoped that there were other people that were maybe a little bit saner that could have stopped him from doing something crazy. Can Putin start this all on his own? Can Putin trigger a nuclear attack all on his own, or is there some process, some other people he's got to get on side?
Again, I don't know. We don't have a good window into who makes those decisions or how they're made. It was interesting after the 2020 election. There's been in the United States, there was lots of commentary about the chairman of the Joint Chiefs trying to calm the Chinese about potential use of American nuclear forces. But interestingly, he made a very clear argument that in the United States, you cannot follow an unlawful order. And the message he was trying to signal was, if even the president made an order to launch nuclear weapons, if the military chain of command deemed that to be unlawful, they by law couldn't follow it. I don't know if there's anything that's comparable to that in the Russian calculus, but I think we're
seriously
still
doubt it.
Well, I seriously doubt it as well. But it's interesting. This is the lawyer in me coming out and trying to explain how strategy is employed. I think we're a ways away from seriously being concerned about that, but I don't take any of that off the table.
We're chatting tonight with Andrew Chester. He is a military expert. He's president of Juno Risk Solutions, which is a cybersecurity risk-oriented company. And he's spent 20 years in the Canadian Navy. He spent 20 years in private sector businesses, all focused on risk and intelligence. He's written recently an article in the Ottawa Citizen about Canada's lack of military preparedness, and we've been chatting about that. We're going to take a break and come back with some concluding comments in just a minute. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Andrew Chester. He is the president at Juno Risk Solutions. He has got really quite a illustrious career. He spent 20 years as a intelligence officer with the Royal Canadian Navy after graduating from RMC and the Norman Patterson School of International Affairs. Then he went back and got a law degree, and then he spent 20 years in numerous different companies that appear to be very associated with cyber risk, cyber intelligence, and risk reduction with iJet Intelligent Risk Systems, Trade Bytes, Data Corp, Joint Operational Resilience Management, and Juno Risk Solutions for the last 12 years. Mr. Chester, who's in charge in the Canadian Army right now?
Well, it's run. We're run by a civilian line of authority. So it starts with the Minister Anand, and below that, General Wayne Eyre. If you were General Wayne Eyre right now, what would you be doing? What would you be saying to your civilian minister? I'd be advising the minister that we need to prepare for engagement in high intensity operations in Europe. and that should be a strategic tool in the government's quiver to apply in its overall strategy to counter Russian aggression.
The Prime Minister is on his way to London to meet with the Prime Minister of the UK and the head of the Netherlands, and supposedly it's because the three of us have been of one mind in our actions. And then he's off to Latvia. Tell me what you think the Prime Minister should do with his allies, and what should he do in Latvia?
In Latvia, we've got a battle group of soldiers. He should tell them that they're supported and they will not be alone in facing the Russians. To our allies, he's got to say that we're there regardless of what the need is, and we recognize just the gravity of the situation that the world's facing right now.
Who is the lady that was asked about World War III in the United States?
Her name was Fiona Hill. She's a Russian specialist.
If I asked you, are we going to be in World War III, like Fiona Hill was asked, what would you respond?
If by World War III you mean a clash of all arms, nuclear, conventional, and cyber, with great countries crashing into each other all across a battlefield, I'm hoping we're not going to get there. Are we in a clash with an aggressive nation that has to be stopped? Absolutely, we're there now. And the only question is, can it be contained, and how can we ensure that it doesn't affect more countries and more people than it is already?
I take it from your description of her response that she thought we started World War III in 2014 or something like that, maybe even early in 2008. Do you agree? Has World War III, to a certain extent, has this clash of civilizations effectively already started?
There's disruption in the international order. There's things that are shaking about all around. So what we're seeing in China, in Asia, is an ascendant China that's challenging a series of connections that have relied upon the United States largely since the end of the Second World War. That's disrupting. What we're seeing in Europe is real challenges to the institutions that held that together again since the Second World War. The removal of Britain from the European Union, the challenges within the European Union to stay solid. A land war in Europe that is attacking one of the core countries, which has borders against all of the core NATO countries. We're seeing right now a disruption in the overall international order. To call this World War III, I think, is alarming. Rather, you should be looking at this in the context of a disruption in a pattern of international relations that has held the world safe for the last 70 years. That's really concerning. It should be concerning to all of us. And I don't think we can escape it here.
So I want to thank our guest, Andrew Chester, President at Juno Risk Solutions, for joining us today and raising our attention to this issue of critical infrastructure in Canada, our lack of preparedness in Canada, and the concerns about what's going on. And let me finish with my own personal point of view, if I could. I don't think that this is World War III yet. I don't think this is comparable to the Nazi Germany attack on September 1st of 1939 on Poland. But I do think this is akin to going into Czechoslovakia. And we cannot be Neville Chamberlain. We cannot be appeasers. And if we haven't learned that appeasement doesn't work, we're going to have to learn it again. And I fear that the next step may be, if we allow Putin to take Ukraine, either a repeat of an attack into Poland or to Latvia, Lithuania, or Estonia. And each one of those countries, particularly the Baltic states, have reasonably sizable Russian-speaking minorities. And so for his own propaganda purposes in Russia himself, he can use the argument about protecting those Russian-speaking minorities. And I think just like Chamberlain needed to stand up more strongly to Hitler when he moved into first Austria and then Czechoslovakia, we do need to stand up stronger and say that this is just unacceptable. And if not, I worry that Fiona Hill's predictions or concerns might come to pass. Anyway, thank you very much for joining us, sir. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
That's our show for tonight. I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online at www.saga960am.ca. Good night, everybody.